subscribe.
The Krays are the most notorious gangsters in British criminal history. They were captured by the police at the height of their career and charged with murder at the age of 34. Found guilty, they went on to spend the rest of their lives in prison. In that time, the legend of the Krays grew, and their fame transformed into infamy.
The Krays are the gangsters that to be compared with all other kinds of organised crime ever since. It's remarkable.
Prisoners saved them from imminent gangland execution.
They'd have been killed. You know that already, huh? Oh, yeah. And then we wouldn't be sat here doing this interview.
It was only a matter of months before the pair of them would been found on the pavement somewhere or other.
On the morning of May 9th, 1968, the Krays were at the height of their criminal career. This dramatically ended when officers from Scotland Yard, led by Leonard Nipper Reid, finally brought the Kray empire to its knees.
The 34-year-old ex-boxer brothers, Reginald and Ronald, came here with flying squad officers at 6 o'clock this morning. They were in bed when the officers called to their home in Shoreditch.
The first I knew about it, funnily enough, was from the newspaper the next morning. My husband said, the Krays have been arrested. I said, oh, well, they've been arrested before. You know, why is it on front page of like 4 or 5 newspapers? He said, no, this is very serious. They've been arrested for murder.
This wasn't the first time the twins had been arrested. In just the past 3 years, they've been charged with menace and even with the murder of fellow gangster Frank Mitchell. Both times they escaped justice, thanks to their friends in high places.
What are you going to do now that it's all over?
I like to have a bit of family life now, you know. I intend to get married in the near future. I did before this case, but it's put back over the case, and just get married as soon as possible, you know.
Ronald, what are you going to do now?
Well, I'd like to go abroad for a short while, and then I'd like to be left alone.
But this time the police were determined there would be no mistakes. They believed they had enough evidence for 2 murder charges. Ronnie had allegedly shot George Cornell, and Reggie was thought to have stabbed Jack, the Hat, McVitie. The twins were arrested in the Dawn raid, and for the Kray associates, it was only a matter of time before they too were caught in Nipper Reid's net.
I was surrounded by police officers in unmarked police cars. Must have been about 15 of them.
They appeared out of nowhere and swooped on me, and guns and stuff like pointing at you and in your head and all that, and arrested me and took me to Tintagel House.
Nipper Reid was sitting behind a big desk, but behind Nipper Reid on a board was all the photographs of the firm, everybody, and associates. And he was very polite, very amicable. And he said, look, I know you weren't involved. He said, but tell us about it.
Nipper Reid's aim was to turn each firm member to give evidence against the twins. After 9 months on remand, the Kray twins and 8 of their associates, including their brother Charlie, went on trial for the murders of George Cornell and Jack McVitie. On the 7th of January 1969, Court Number 1 of the Old Bailey became the focus of the nation.
Been that long on remand, it was almost a relief when it started, and we were all in one van. It was just us, and the van would go from Brixton to Wandsworth, or Wandsworth to Brixton, and then to the Old Bailey. Motorcycle outriders, helicopter. This was like a trial that nobody'd ever seen before.
It was a trial that was to go down in history. As well as the furore surrounding the capture of the Krays, an unusual legal step was taken too. Instead of the 2 murders being tried separately, the charges were put together, which meant Court Number 1 had 10 defendants in the dock.
They had wide interests in the theatre and in entertainment, and they're well known for their fundraising work for charity. Up to a few years ago, they were well-known West End theatre first-nighters and hosts to some of the newer big names in show business.
It was a great stage for them. The one thing that people, I think, underestimate about both Ron and Reg Kray was they were geniuses at public relations. They were good at presenting themselves in court as gangsters. It's what they were, and they were proud of it.
they came up, I thought, oh my God, you are still thinking you're on show, which they always like to be. You're still playing to an audience. Hey, look at me. You know, we might be in the Old Bailey, but we're going to get off this.
The trial focused on 2 murders of known villains. It was alleged that Ronnie had walked into the Blind Beggar pub and shot George Cornell in 1966, and that Reggie had stabbed Jack McVitie to death 1 year later in 1967. It was the chaotic murder of Jack the Hat that gave the police the opportunity to start compiling evidence against the twins.
They just kept rolling over one after the other, you know. Nothing surprised me at all. Once they started rolling over, then a lot of them did, you know. They had about 30 statements inside a few weeks.
The very romantic idea that certainly Ronnie had about the underworld and you don't grass and you don't inform, all this was thrown out of the window.
But it wasn't just firm members giving evidence against the Krays. Nipper Reed had an ace up his sleeve.
They were invincible. They were totally invincible. And I had my doubts until the barmaid got in the dock.
Worst thing happened, the barmaid. Once that barmaid walked into that court, and I looked at the twins and they were shocked.
This young girl spoke like an angel, and you could not fail to listen and be moved by the things she said. You could tell this was a girl that was speaking the truth.
And of course she was perfect, because she immediately said, that's the man, that's Ronnie Kray.
You're living beyond hope that you're going to walk, you're going to get a not guilty. But when that barmaid gave her evidence, there's that slow sinking feeling that kind of goes through you, and that's the thing that's condemned you.
The crucial evidence from the Blind Beggar barmaid played a key part in the twins' guilty conviction, and even today, her identity is protected. The Krays were finally brought to justice and were found guilty of both murders, along with their associates, for different levels of involvement.
Reggie went up first, and he came down with 30 years. So we know what we're dealing with. We know this is serious business.
Ronnie was also given 30 years. Freddie Foreman 10, Charlie Kray 10, and Chris Lambriano 15.
The judge, Melford Stevenson, was a very heavy-duty character, and at the end of the trial he told them that society needs a rest from your behaviour, which has almost become a cliche for judges to say now.
You're looking at endless years. You can't even begin to see the end of it. And then you think, where my loyalties lie? What am I going to say to my daughter?
It does, at first sight, appear to be quite a harsh sentence, and I think there's quite a well-identifiable reason for that. These two were challenging the establishment, and the state wanted to stamp that out and say, hang on a minute, we're not going to tolerate this kind of behaviour. And they were held up almost as an example for others to not, get involved in this kind of thing, because this is what would happen to you.
The Kray firm would serve a total of over 110 years behind bars. The twins had been sentenced to life in prison, and in their case, life meant life. Their violent crimes and notoriety meant Ronnie and Reggie Kray were viewed as the most dangerous men in Britain, and the police were taking no chances when transporting them and their associates to prison.
We went up with an escort all Jaguar squad cars, about 6, tailing us up, and on every flyover there was coppers on the top of the flyovers, like with the walkie-talkies and that, and it was mad. It was.
The prison system at the time was coming back from a period in which it had really been ridiculed and made fun of because of all the escapes that had happened in the previous decade. It wanted to kind of assert its power and its authority, so there would have been a lot of anxiety around receiving these two.
We were classed as the worst of the criminal element in prison, so we were all kind of double category A. So instead of having us, in amongst the general population, they got these special units.
The Category A prisoners would go to a prison within a prison, essentially, where it was felt that they would be able to be contained and there'd be less of a risk to the public and other prisoners.
And They called it the submarine because it had low ceilings, and they reinforced all the cells and bars in the window. You couldn't see the daylight coming through the windows, and the doors had so many locks and bolts on them you wouldn't believe.
Initially, the twins were separated. Ronnie went to Durham prison, Reggie to Parkhurst. It was a far cry from the life they'd left behind. The whirlwind of glamour and celebrity in London's West End they had cultivated at the height of their fame.
Well, when you're first given it, it's just numbers. You walk in that cell and you've got your bare cell equipment in there, and you're looking at a concrete tomb, and it don't hit you the first night. It don't hit you. You're just banged up. And then you think, I've got this for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, 30 years.
It's just complete boredom, you know. When you live in that close proximity, there was more rows and fights in there than there was in a wing with 300 prisoners. But he'd never come out and mix with anybody. But yeah, he really is in his own little world, you know, his own shell.
Thanks to the efforts of their mother, Violet, the twins were reunited when Ronnie was transferred to Reggie's prison, Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight, known as the British Alcatraz.
You'd have IRA terrorists in there. Some bad child killers who nobody'd speak to. People who were just very violent, and people who were notorious, like Ronnie and Reggie Kray.
You live a day at a time. You don't serve a prison sentence, you survive a prison sentence. So all this myth about the Krays, you know, tough guys, they was the same as any other prisoner in there.
As for Ronnie and Reggie, their new life had no discernible end in sight.
The joke used to be in prison, if someone got lifed off with a recommendation, they go, when's he getting out? We go, the Tuesday after the Krays, right? That was the joke in prison. In other words, they ain't coming out.
Was it worth it? Where is the money now? Where is the glamour now? Where is the excitement now?
But it was the money, glamour and excitement that drove a young Ronnie and Reggie to a life of crime. In the post-war years, they were two young lads from an impoverished East End of London with something to prove.
In my world, he was either a footballer, a boxer, or he was a criminal. Did I think about the consequences when I didn't? No, I didn't. I wanted what I needed. I wanted what other people had. And if crime was the way I got it, then so be it.
Their activities included extortion, protection and fraud, all grown out of operating snooker halls and clubs in the East End. The twins' violent reputation was soon noticed. They were talent-spotted by West End gang leaders as natural successors to a more glamorous lifestyle.
It came just after the people who were running organised crime in central London, Billy Hill and Jack Spott, and they were the next generation, and I think both Hill and Spott saw them as the young pretenders coming along.
Despite fighting in unison, once behind bars, Ronnie and Reggie found it hard to coexist.
They bickered and argued all the time, you know, plus, because it was the twins, there was always a few people who were a little bit lively that fancied themselves, and they were doing a lot of damage, right? At the end of the day, this is from Ronnie's mouth, he said he was getting pissed off. But he just wanted out of it, you know. It was arguments day in, day out. And it was his old friend, Frank Fraser, who said to him, Broadmoor's fine. If you go to Broadmoor, get yourself nutted off, you can wear your own clothes. Everybody knows that Ron was a homosexual. You can have as much sex as you like there. He said, so I thought to myself, I'm going to play up, really play up. I'm going to get myself nutted off.
It's commonly accepted that Ronnie was somebody who needed medication to control his moods and his temperament. And to me, that would suggest that he was mentally ill as opposed to psychopathic. So here was somebody who, without medication, would become very upset, very anxious, very frightened on occasions.
When I heard that he'd gone to Broadmoor, I thought, good. I thought he'll be better. He'll have his treatment. He'll have a room to himself. He'll be allowed to do what he wants. Allowed to wear what he wants, which would please him greatly. He's allowed to have all the visitors that he wanted.
Ronnie's status switched from prisoner to patient under the Mental Health Act.
In Broadmoor, you are a patient, you're not a prisoner, you're a resident, you're not an inmate. So the kind of labelling that goes on does change your self-concept a little bit, and it's quite clear that Ronnie got on better in that environment than he did in the prison system.
Once the twins had been separated, one thing became abundantly clear. Their relationship was hugely complex.
An affinity between them two, which was unbreakable. They kind of interwoven characters, you know, and it was something that I think brought them down eventually, you know.
Reggie made his own way. Ronnie, to be quite honest, you know, apart from not being let out the door, you know, he was in like a holiday camp compared to what Reg went through.
For Reggie, life in Parkhurst soon became a lot tougher without his twin.
It left Reggie totally isolated, no backup. Then people started taking liberties because then they said he hasn't got Ronnie with him. So we had a lot of fights to contend with, a lot of hard years.
They wrote to each other all the time, and it was really sad. Like, sometimes I'd go and see Reg, you know, because there was me, Charlie, Reg all on the same day. I'd go and see Reg, and I'd go, you know, how's Ron? And he'd go, oh, he's all right. But you could see it was hurting, you know, and it would be like a mother being took away from a child. You took back twins here. They had a close relationship as kids, they had close relationships as adults, and all of a sudden you're tearing them apart.
Together they would die for each other, but they used to get into the most violent of fights with each other. But if anybody got in there to try and separate them, they'd turn and they'd kill them. You know, it's as simple as that.
It looked as if the twins had been tamed by the prison system. But then, in the mid-70s, a book was released which changed everything.
The whole situation with the twins would have died down like any other gangsters once they go to jail. And you're away 2-3 years, people forget, you know. But then John Pearson writes a book called A Profession of Violence. And once again, you have that stark David Bailey photograph of the twins on the front. Everybody bought it.
And this is when the Krays began to forge a new legend and recreate their criminal empire from behind bars. The most famous villains of the 20th century were slowly adapting to prison life, fading into obscurity. But suddenly, in the mid-1970s, John Pearson's book, The Profession of Violence, provoked a resurgence in the Krays' infamous reputation. Only a few years ago, on the outside, the name Kray had held enormous power.
They'd really only just got started before they got nicked. But no matter where they went, they didn't have to demand protection money. People wanted to give it to them, just to have their name there. You know, don't start in here. Krays look after us. They never saved a penny. It was always that war cry, you know. They get up in the morning, realise they spent the dough that they've got. We've got to go out and get some more. You know, it was like a daily routine with them.
And this constant need for money continued once the twins were off the streets and residing at Her Majesty's pleasure. In fact, it was only just the beginning. As Ron saw, the fame inspired by the book opened up business opportunities.
Listen, we need to get some money. I thought, oh, shite, here we go. He was very switched on to making legitimate money. I said, well, have you ever thought of, like, T-shirts, Kray twins on tour, or so he started laughing. He said, go on, tell me some more. I said, I'm sure I can fix something up. Do it, straight away.
At one point, the twins were said to be earning £3,000 per week from Kray merchandise. But this was only the beginning. The twins found that they could expand into other business interests. Essentially, the twins started licensing their name for other companies to use.
I mean, some of those people that used to want to come and see him were like security firms. Give us a couple of grand, yeah, you can use our name. You're with us. Give us a couple of grand. And they were pinching 2 grand here, 2 grand there, just by people that wanted to be able to say, well, you know, well, Wouldn't do that if I was you. You know, we're associated with the Krays.
And when elder brother Charlie was released from prison, they had a man on the outside who could rebuild the Kray Empire. He set up Kray Enterprises, which collected earnings from the twins' lucrative rackets operated from the inside.
Kray Enterprises was actually put up as a legitimate company by Charlie, right? That was going to supply bodyguards, personal protection.
We've always thought they were more money in jail than they ever did when they was out of jail.
Papers later released under the Freedom of Information Act show the authorities in Broadmoor were monitoring these business activities. One referred to a business card describing Kray Enterprises as personal aids to the Hollywood stars. It was thought that Frank Sinatra hired 18 bodyguards from the firm for a trip to London. There was no legal basis to shut it down, but as usual with the Krays, it soon ran its course.
The few guys that they had on the books was like knocking a few people out unnecessarily, not even for wages. I just had to say to Charlie at the time, "You've got to turn this one in. This is stupid for you." And he did, he wiped it down.
With the resurgence of the Kray brand, it meant that the twins were still household names. In 1982, one of their most personal moments became the most public. They received the devastating news that their beloved mother, Violet, was dead.
It was very important to them. They were very close to their mother. It was very important for the general public because it was open. You could go along to the funeral.
Reggie, I remember, was furious about the funeral because he said they handcuffed me to the biggest prison officer they could find, and they did that on purpose to humiliate me, to make me look small against this big guy next to me.
We saw them shake hands, no tears, no crying, which they wouldn't have done. What I know that they did in their cells, because they both told me, they both broke down. And then immediately they were taken away out of the church and taken away.
Violet's funeral and the twins' first public appearance in over a decade fueled the Krays story, and it continued to grip the public's imagination.
I think they were extremely aware of the position they had in criminal history, and they enjoyed it, and they took advantage of it.
They would receive fan mail, in actual fact, especially from women. So there's a kind of the thrill of meeting that person, of being with that person, but knowing that actually you're not in any real danger.
And celebrities were equally as guilty of idolizing the gangsters.
You've got to understand that the division between gangster and celebrities, film stars, etc., it's a very fine line. They've both got to live in their own worlds, both want to know each other's worlds, you know. And yeah, he had a lot of visitors from the world of showbiz.
It wasn't just the celebrities clamoring to be part of the Kray circle. Inside prison, their fellow inmates wanted to be associated with them too.
I think there was a fascination for younger prisoners with the Krays, both because of the glamour, and some of it would rub off on them. The Krays liked it because there were these nice-looking young men hanging around and looking after them. When I saw Ronnie Kray in Broadmoor, he had almost like a valet with him, pouring his Barbican non-alcoholic lager and handing him his cigarettes.
He said, "I have a cleaner to clean my room." I said, "A cleaner? Who cleans your room?" He said, "Oh, a young boy in here."
And David Fraser experienced the same behaviour with Reggie.
They followed him everywhere he went. And when we used to go out and exercise, I thought, oh, please God, don't come and have a walk round with us, because but he made it known that he didn't want them to have a walk round, so they would just stay away. But the minute he went back to the cell, they would have everything ready for him. They were stargazers.
Whilst it was no secret that Ronnie Kray was homosexual, many rumours have circulated about Reggie's sexuality inside prison.
At that time, we weren't doing no harm to anyone, and if he was that way inclined, that was his business. That's how I looked at it. But It was quite funny with the young fellas, and there was the rumours, there were always rumours, but then in prison there is always rumour.
For a man of his age, he was in fact in tremendous condition, well able to defend himself against potential attacks which are always liable to happen in an environment like Parkhurst.
In the early prison years, visits to both Ronnie and Reggie were restricted to just family. Their mum Violet visited them every week until she died. Now the visits were very different.
The visit was always upbeat. He'd come out with pieces of paper and say what he wanted you to do, who he wanted you to phone. Could you go and get me a pair of trainers? And I was thinking, where am I going to get this money to go? Well, it's already arranged. If you go to my mother, somebody's dropped some money round, and I'd have to go and buy a pair of Reebok trainers.
I remember that Reggie did have quite a good relationship with the prison officers. I can remember them coming with a plate of Kit Kats for us as he was discussing things, and he would receive them politely and they would hand them out politely.
And visits weren't the only form of communication. Reggie would write incessantly to associates on the outside, sending out instructions from business deals to working on his parole.
Reggie would write non-stop. 3 o'clock in the morning, when you got the letter, it said on the top, 3 a.m. And I used to think, well, what are you up at 3 a.m. writing to me for? But that was because he had to write at least 20 letters. But scribble, you've seen their terrible writing, veering to the right, veering to the left. Some people couldn't understand it.
Despite his early efforts to keep fit and mentally alert, Reg was in slow decline. His ability to write even a simple letter highlighted the change in him from his early days behind bars, shown in his correspondence with his former associate, Frankie Fraser.
Letter he wrote to my father. February of the year they got a sentence, thanking my father for giving evidence. If you compare that with later letters that I've received off him when I was in jail and he was in jail,
There's no comparison.
There's no comparison.
Ronnie, on the other hand, adapted well to his surroundings, spending his time painting and receiving visitors in Broadmoor.
I was even allowed to go and see his cell. When I was first there, it was really, really grim. It really was an old Victorian cell with the iron bars at the window and a narrow slit of a window. But by the time my writing was complete after 3 years, a lot of the modernisation at Broadmoor had started, and in actual fact he'd got himself then a very nice room with his own curtains that he'd selected, velvet curtains, etc., and a nice double bed. So things had improved considerably for him.
He was sat there in a beautiful cashmere suit. So I thought he owned the place.
But even in the relatively comfortable surroundings of Broadmoor, Ronnie was still prone to violent outbursts. In 1993, he was caught trying to strangle a fellow patient, sparking a security review.
Doctors at Broadmoor have been experimenting with Ronnie Kray's medication. In other words, the drugs they use to control his schizophrenia. That's put him under a lot of stress. He's certainly been very depressed for the last 2 or 3 weeks, combined also with perhaps goading from another patient. And you've got the recipe there for, if you like, a cocktail of violence.
People would write to them and say, often quite genuinely, I'm sure, my son, you know, he's terribly poorly, he's dying. They would never say no. They would never check it out. They would, if someone said, I need £5,000 because I've got cancer, I need special treatment, they would say, right, pay them.
Money was easy come, easy go for the twins. Freedom was much harder to achieve. As the Kray twins grew older, they established a new way of life. Ronnie and Reggie had their books and a film deal. The money was less and less important to them. Now all they needed was their release. And Ronnie took drastic steps to make this happen. Even though Ron was openly gay, he surprised everyone when he decided to get married in Broadmoor.
He had this dream, this vision of freedom. And Ronnie, I think, always believed that one day he would be free. And I think that's also why he got married.
His mind was alert enough to know, like, if I can convince the authorities that I'm sane and I'm no longer a danger, I'm not homosexual, I'm in a proper man-woman relationship, that I'm saying I'll get out of this and then I've got a chance of getting out.
It was a plan that was clearly in Reggie's mind too. He asked Maureen to marry him on 3 different occasions.
He said, I've asked her to marry me. She hasn't said yes yet. So Charlie Kray said, what does she want the aggravation of being married to you for? You already give her enough to do, buying this, buying that, go and see this one, write this letter, keep up the parole for me.
In 1985, Ron married his first wife, Elaine, a friend of Maureen Flanagan's, who had been writing to him in Broadmoor, and who Maureen took with her on one of her many visits.
He said, are you all right, Elaine? She said, yeah, I'm fine, Ron. He said, right, well, now, are we going to get married or what? Just like that. And she went and looked at me, and Ronnie said, what are you looking at her for? It's me you've got to answer. Yes? She went, you're okay. He said, all I wanted you to say, yes, because I'm gonna get the son involved because they'll give us a lot of money. I thought, oh my God, please don't tell me you're just doing this marriage for the money. So I said, have you spoken to someone at the Sun? He said, yes, and I'm gonna get 20 grand.
After 4 years, in 1989, Ronnie divorced Elaine so he could marry his next wife, Kate, a kissogram from Kent.
He's a real gentleman, one of the old school. There's not many of them about.
But what sort of marriage will it be, as far as you're concerned? I mean, how often will you see him?
Well, I see him twice a week. I'm in contact with him every night, because I ring him every night. That's all, really, just twice a week.
Ronnie's marriage to Kate was more or less a kind of, it was almost a show business affair, and he was actually allowed out of Broadmoor to a local hotel to marry Kate. And several other gangland figures were there. Wedding was over, they had a kiss and a glass of champagne, and it was back inside to Broadmoor.
And what about the future? How do you see the future?
Well, it'd be nice if they let him out, and hopefully they will. But if they don't, I'll take what I can get.
The marriage didn't last, but the stories kept the Kray name alive. By the early 1990s, the Kray twins were cemented into popular culture. The twins, although separated, continued to visit each other on an average once a month. However, the strong bond between them was finally broken forever on March 17th, 1995. Ronnie died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving Reg devastated.
He was in a different wing to me, Reggie. And when I heard the news that Ronnie died, he was in pieces then, and they let me go over and see him, and we're just talking and reminiscing, and you know, and then he'd have a little cry, and then they'd let me stay there right through the day with him to keep him in company.
I wrote the obituary for Ron Kray, and I was just struck by the reaction of the media that they became fans. The media became fans of the Krays. They would typically, there'd be a huge picture of the twins, and there'd be stories about his death, there'd be stories about what terrible, evil people they were, and then see page 4, 5, 6 and 7 for more stories about the Krays. It sold newspapers, you know.
And Reggie, ever the Krays' PR man, threw himself into arranging his brother's final farewell.
And when Reggie arranged all that funeral, he said, we've got 26 limos. I thought, oh my God. And he's going to be buried like a king. This is all on the phone to me. And I want you to be the person in the church that seats the people. I thought, oh God.
My brother Charlie and I will ensure that he has a good, decent funeral. He's going to be buried at Chingford Cemetery, where my mother and father lay. We will all be giving it to the national press so they can inform the public and our friends.
There was a service in East London, and they read a bit of Invictus by Henley. I think we had My Way sung. It was an enormous event, and then it went out to the cemetery. That's when Reggie arrived with the prison officers.
It was the scale of it that was extraordinary. And people like Frankie Fraser sort of waving to the crowds as he drove through as part of the funeral cortege.
We had lots of men in dark glasses and suits embracing each other. You know, back in the 60s, the idea of men embracing each other at a graveyard would have been, you know, oh my God, no. But it now was like a scene from a Godfather film.
Ronnie's funeral provided an opportunity for the next generation of London's gangland to mix with the old guard. Rumours of drug taking off Ronnie's coffin lid and the subsequent violence fueled the media hype for weeks after.
Well, he's a good brother, he's very loyal and he's very generous. There are lots of nice ways about him, and I shall always remember him. With good memories, you know. I know he's at peace, that's the main thing, he's at peace. So his friends at peace, so I'm pleased.
As Reggie began to adjust to life knowing he would never be reunited with his twin, he eventually started to look to the future. Ever hopeful of being freed, a meeting with a young filmmaker named Roberta led to a life-changing event.
Reggie, I think, didn't want to be alone.
And they were genuinely friends, you know. Again, perhaps Reggie thought, if I'm married, if I've got this respectable background, it'll be okay, I'll be freed.
And I genuinely believe this to this day. All right, Reg was having his boyfriends in there, but I genuinely believe that he did fall in love with Roberta. He rang me one day. I never heard Reg cry, but he was crying on the phone. I went, what's up with you? I just couldn't believe it. He said, she's dumped me. So I rang Roberta. I said, for God's sake, I said, I never heard this man cry. Do me a favour, speak to him, please. And I said, okay, I will. Then from there, they got married.
But the marriage wasn't to last long. During his 32 years in prison, Reggie lost his mother, father, and twin brother. His elder brother Charlie died in April 2000. At the same time, Reggie became seriously ill.
Reggie got stomach cancer. We kept applying for parole, which they agreed when he had about, well, they said 2 months to live.
Reggie was released for his final 5 weeks. He lived in a hotel, nursed by his wife, Roberta. On the day he died, 4 men stayed with him, each one a criminal legend.
He actually died in my arms. He couldn't speak, he couldn't talk, and he was semi-conscious, but he was struggling with the breathing and that. And I said, I had my arm around his back, and I said, don't fight it, Reg. I said, let go, you know. So I see another time, another place. I said, you know, and I'll come over a bit emotional because I'm a bit emotional person. And I took my arm away. I said, he's gone. I said, he's gone, you know. And Joe Powell and Johnny Nash stayed, and I said, he's gone. Because I couldn't hear any breathing or he wasn't making any noise at all, you know. And then all of a sudden he went, that's how he went. And everyone jumped. I jumped. They all jumped in the air like that. And he made that, that's what he did. He made that to the last air expelling from his body, you know, coming out of his body. He made that noise just as well as I did now. And it does make you jump, doesn't it?
And once again the East End came to a standstill as it said farewell to another notorious son.
The funeral procession was to wind through the streets where the Kray twins grew up, which they later ruled.
Since Reggie's death, the Kray twins have remained a popular symbol of a moment in time, the swinging 60s, when anything was possible.
Kray should be remembered as a strange phenomenon of British culture.
I remember them all with affection.
I wish I'd never met them.
They become Robin Hoods. But my father has become like a Robin Hood syndrome.
There'll be a million stories, a million lies and a million stories.
By going to prison, Ronnie and Reggie cemented their place as legends of the underworld. As they aged safely behind bars, so their brand grew, achieving a notoriety which perhaps could never have been reached on the outside. But they and their victims paid a price for that fame.
I believe in the end that prison did break them both. It broke their health. And in the end, I think, certainly in the case of Ronnie, it broke their spirit as well.
I think if there is a legacy, it's don't be an unsuccessful criminal, because whatever else they were very unsuccessful criminals.
Crime don't pay. Charlie Kray died in prison. Reggie Kray died in prison. Ronnie Kray died in prison. For whatever they achieved in life was such a small amount to what they might have achieved.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.